True crime story of a teenage girl abducted, only for her body to show up a month later frozen like ice, but there are no fingerprints and no suspects, leading to one of Britain's most baffling unsolved murder mysteries. A month after she went missing, the fully clothed body of 17-year-old Noblet was found in woodland, frozen solid, despite the weather being mild, leading to a suspicion her killer had kept her on ice. Born in 1940 during the Second World War, and grew up to be a quiet and shy girl who loved dance and rock and roll and was enrolled at the Watford Technical College. She enjoyed living with her well-off parents in Wheat Hampstead, Hertfordshire, where she was raised, just 27 miles north of central London. On December 30, 1957. The bespectacled and attended a dance lesson with friends at Lord Hall in Harpenden, 4 miles away from her home. After class, they all jumped on the bus headed in the direction of Anne's family home, and got off the bus at Cherry Tree Corner, Marshall's Heath, close to the Cherry Trees pub, which was only 1/4 mile walk away from her home. She waved at her friends as the bus continued on its route. A minute later, a local girl named Shirley Edwards rode past and on her scooter and was the last person to see her alive. At some point during the next 10 minutes, between the Cherry Trees pub and her home, and disappeared. And was reported missing the same night, and the police brought in search dogs to scour the area but found no trace of the homely teenager. Her parents organized a search party the next day but to no avail despite involving an estimated 1,000 people. A local resident told police she noticed a vehicle stopped on the lane where Anne would have walked home at the time of her disappearance, but only saw its rear lights in the dark, leading police to conclude that Anne had been abducted. Local cinemas began showing newsreels about the disappearance before films to raise awareness, and over 2,000 statements were taken by police but they had no suspect. The case went cold quickly as no new leads were uncovered and evidence was thin on the ground. On January 31, 1958, 1 month after the disappearance, RAF Airman Hugh Simons, and his younger brother Brian, were walking the family dog through Rosegrove Woods when the dog ran off into a clearing. The brothers followed the dog and stumbled upon Anne's fully clothed body, 6 miles away from her home. It appeared as though she may have been asleep, but Hugh reached out and touched her body to discover that she was frozen solid like a block of ice, which was unusual, as the winter had been mild, and the temperature had been rising quickly into the new year. There was no natural way that the body could have been frozen unless it had been kept on ice and dumped in the days prior to the discovery. Police arrived on the scene and confirmed that it was the missing 17-year-old. Her body couldn't be seen from the nearby lane, 200 meters away. And if the Simons' dog hadn't gone into the clearing, then it may have remained undiscovered for longer. An investigation team arrived at the unusual scene and got to work. Anne was found fully clothed and still wearing her glasses. But her undergarments had been incorrectly buttoned up, which suggested she had been sexually abused or raped. Her purse and belongings were close to her body, meaning she hadn't been robbed, or that the killer had left the items to throw police off the scent. Coins from her purse were spread over the ground around her body. After an autopsy was carried out, the pathologist concluded she had been strangled to death shortly after her abduction and that there were signs of sexual assault. There was undigested food in her stomach that she had eaten on the day of her abduction. The woodland location had already been searched after the disappearance, which meant her body had been placed there after the fact. The day after the body was found, the surrounding woods were searched by a bigger group of locals and soldiers to find any evidence as to who had killed her. The nearby lane was only generally used by locals as a shortcut, which suggested the killer may have been living nearby. The local Criminal Investigation Department, CID, headed by Detective Chief Superintendent Robert Elwell, called in the New Scotland Yard Murder Squad to help in the investigation, and they began to piece together the murder. Anne had been picked up, either by someone she knew or was forcibly abducted, then taken back to a property where she was raped, strangled to death, then placed in a large freezer where she remained until 1 month later. Unusually, there were no fingerprints found on Anne's body, clothes, or belongings. The freezing of the body gave police a lot to work on. It was suspected that she was kept on ice for one of two reasons. The first being that the killer knew about the local investigation and couldn't risk dumping the body when the region was under scrutiny. The second being that the body was frozen to confuse detectives about the timeline of her death. If her body had thawed out, then it may have looked as though she had died later than she actually did. It was a tactic used by hitman and serial killer Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman, in the United States. Police searched every house and business within a 30-mile area looking for large freezers on the assumption that it was a local person who had abducted Anne. At the same time, the press jumped on the story and referred to it as the deep freeze murder. The investigation team were looking for a strong man who would have carried Anne's 11-stone frozen body from a vehicle to her final resting place. Without dragging the body through the undergrowth, the search teams went through industrial sites, farms, outbuildings, sheds, garages, and any location where a freezer may have been placed. But of the thousands of freezers searched, not one showed any signs of having stored a dead body. Due to the unusual method of freezing the body, the police admitted that it was one of the most baffling murder cases they had ever come across. Detective Elwell then suggested that Anne might have been kept inside a refrigerated vehicle. There was even the slight possibility that she had been picked up by a murderous ice cream van driver who lured her into the van with sweet treats. When investigating the vehicle angle, Elwell and his team expanded the search to cover London and neighboring counties. But as the investigation grew in geographical size, it became harder to narrow down where they should be searching, and the case began to drift away from them. It was suggested that the body had lain in the spot for 2 weeks prior to being discovered, because the shrubbery around the body had 2 weeks additional growth than the crushed shrubbery beneath it. But the body hadn't thawed out and was still frozen. Dispelling the 2-week theory, after the death, some of the local residents stated they had seen a black car driving around the area in the days prior to the abduction, driven by a man wearing big-rimmed glasses. The car and man were never traced and were never seen again. Within a couple of months, the murder investigation had gone cold. A more recent theory suggested that the body had been dumped in a refrigerated van without the knowledge of the owner, and when that owner found the body, decided to place it in the forest. The refrigerated vehicle theory remains a stretch for most researchers, as driving the body of a dead girl around the country was too bold a move for a killer in the 1950s. All forensic evidence collected from the body was destroyed 40 years later in the 1990s due to police storage regulations at the time. Using any kind of DNA technique, including profiling, has been off the cards ever since. In 2017, 60 years after the murder, Hertfordshire police briefly reopened the case and appealed to the public for help, but to no avail. There was no new forensic material or no new evidence to shine light on a possible suspect, who police believed would have died long before 2017. Anne's death fell into the realm of the unsolved. And that's when sightings of ghosts and tales of hauntings began doing the rounds. In the 1970s, a worker at an industrial unit near to Anne's old home saw a teenage girl standing next to a shed. When the worker called to her, the girl vanished before his eyes. Local cats were known to have stopped near the site of the abduction and hiss at something unseen. Other locals told tales of someone brushing up against them when no one else was around. And a nearby hire center continuously experienced strange happenings like doors opening by themselves and cold spots in the building. A séance was held in the late 1990s at the location the body was found, and the spiritualists claimed to have received the identity of the killer, but no one was arrested, let alone named. There remains one more interesting connection to Anne's murder. 75 miles away in Colchester on January 5, 1958, just 1 week after Anne disappeared, 19-year-old Mary Creek got off a bus near her home and was abducted. Her body was found in a ditch the next day, only a few miles from her home. She had been battered to death. Despite the similarities between both Mary's and Anne's deaths, detectives found no evidence to link them. Mary's death also remains unsolved till this day. It appears that the case of Noblet may never be cracked and remains one of Britain's most baffling unsolved murders. Her killer may have got away with the perfect murder, until his judgment at the pearly gates. Thanks for watching. Please share and subscribe on my YouTube channel and follow me on Facebook @Monpy Stories for more.